Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, as South Africa's leader calls on the world for support for the continent to ride out the ravages of coronavirus. At home, trust in Pretoria's management of the pandemic's taken a hit because of corruption. Also, Cameroonian opposition leaders say that at least one anti-government protester is killed in connection to rallies that see police use tear gas on crowds. And Mali's military junta calls for an end to trade sanctions as it celebrates 60 years of independence from France, a month on from a coup that toppled President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. But first, on the first day of the UN General Assembly, South Africa's president urged that nations keep up efforts to stamp out racism in all its form. With the coronavirus pandemic overshadowing the international meeting, Cyril Ramaphosa, who's also the chair of the African Union, also called for a stimulus package to help his region deal with the fallout of COVID-19.
It is in the spirit of this new global deal that we call on the international community and our international partners to support the rollout of a comprehensive stimulus package for African countries. This will enable African countries to not only mitigate the health impacts of COVID-19, but to aid us in the immense task of rebuilding our shattered economies.
Well, despite the hurdles thrown down by the pandemic, Africa's response has been praised. South Africa has been the country worst affected on the continent, but even there, the mortality rate, 16,000, has been far lower than the 40,000 originally forecast. However, local trust in the government's handling of the emergency has been hit hard by corruption. Our team reports.
On Fridays, South Africans have taken to wearing orange masks. The gesture is in protest against the corruption that has blighted the country's coronavirus response.
Orange symbolizes those who are going to jail. So prisoners wear orange when they go into jail. So we want the politicians and those who have stolen and who's been found guilty of corruption to wear orange. The president makes wonderful speeches, but then there are no action.
In August, Cyril Ramaphosa launched a probe into the misuse of COVID relief funds. Members of civil society met with the president to demand justice after millions of euros worth of public money was squandered.
There was a significant inflation of pricing in some of the contracts that were awarded, the provision of substandard equipment, PPE equipment in other cases, equipment that was being used by frontline healthcare workers, which put their lives at risk. So these are very, very serious issues.
Despite the scandal, South Africa has been praised by the World Health Organization for its handling of the pandemic. There have been far fewer victims than originally forecast, but many think that the figures are misleading. Over the past few months, the country's overall death rate has been 2 to 3 times higher than normal. According to some experts, that suggests that a large number of COVID deaths may not have been accounted for in official statistics.
We think that mostly they're reporting the numbers that happen of deaths that happen in the hospitals, and deaths that have happened in the community or long-term care have probably not been, or not all of them have been included.
Researchers have begun re-examining all death certificates issued during this period. It may be months before the true death toll is known.
Well, Cameroon's main opposition party says that at least one protester was killed as police cracked down with tear gas and water cannon on anti-government protests on Tuesday. The rallies against President Paul Biya were called by his rival, Maurice Kamto. The leader of the MRC party, Regina Sondo, tells us more.
In the end, dozens of protesters took to the streets of Douala in response to the MRC party's call for the ousting of President Paul Biya. Police officers used tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowd that showed up in some parts of the city of Douala. Information reaching us that we gathered from locals states that about 50 persons were arrested, including journalists. The security forces said these journalists did not have the authorization to film. Unlike Douala, the city of Yaoundé was relatively calm. The residence of Professor Maurice Kamto has been heavily guarded since Monday, and other parts of the city have been controlled by security forces. We've equally heard about patrols that have been taking place in the city of Yaoundé. Not only Maurice Kamto, but then leaders of other political parties such as Kawala and Jang Denis were prevented from leaving their homes because riot police were stationed in front of their homes. Information says that the leaders of MRC party were equally arrested while looking at leaders such as the treasurer and the spokesperson. In all, we're going to say that this call for a protest to oust President Paul Biya was not widely respected, as most demonstrators were intimidated by the presence of security and defense forces on the streets of major cities of Cameroon. Now, the CPDM, the ruling party, has appealed those demonstrators who did not step out of their homes, and they have called them patriots.
Regina Sondo there for us. Now, the Speaker of Kenya's National Assembly has accused the country's judge of offering unconstitutional advice in his bid to dissolve Parliament for not having enough female MPs. Chief Justice David Maraga has approached President Uhuru Kenyatta about the move, saying that lawmakers had failed to meet a requirement for at least a third of seats to be occupied by women, and that is unconstitutional. Speaker Justin Muturi has said that Parliament will launch a legal challenge to Maraga's recommendation. The leader of Mali's military junta has called for economic sanctions brought in after last month's coup against President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta to be lifted. Colonel Assimi Goïta says that the nomination on Monday of a civilian interim president should prompt the end of a trade embargo by regional bloc ECOWAS. Former Defence Minister Ba Ndor was named as transitional leader to lead for a maximum 18 months before national elections are held. Now, the calls for an end to sanctions came as Mali celebrated 60 years of independence. It was a tumultuous breakaway from France, as James Vazina tells us.
The French flag comes down as Mali's new colours are hoisted in Dakar on the 20th of June 1960. In the streets, crowds celebrate the newly formed Mali Federation, a merger of two former French territories, Senegal and French Sudan. Officials from the mother country hand over the power under the watchful eye of Léopold Senghor, the spearhead of negotiations for independence. But as clashes broke out in government over plans for the country's future, the excitement was short-lived. On one side, the Senegalese hoped to keep close ties with France, while the Sudanese sought a self-standing state bolstered by Pan-African values.
Le militarisme par lui-même est un stimulant pour des populations qui pendant longtemps avaient une vie purement rurale. Nous avons donc militarisé nos jeunes pour pouvoir entraîner les populations dans la perspective de leur mobilisation pour les investissements humains.
Dakar a vécu des heures de fièvre.
Following a state of emergency, lawmakers from Senegal voted to break away from the federation on the 20th of August.
Les Soudanais rêvaient d'un État unitaire où ils nous auraient dominés grâce à leur nombre et à leur discipline. Nous voulions, nous, d'un État fédéral très souple. Ils rêvaient de concentrer l'essentiel des pouvoirs fédéraux entre les mains d'un seul homme. Nous voulions d'un régime démocratique où les pouvoirs, pour collaborer, se partageraient et s'équilibreraient.
A month later, the union was well and truly shattered. French Sudan also declared its independence. On the 22nd of September, it was renamed and became what is now the Republic of Mali.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
So I believe the only way to make sure information is accurate is to actually go to the source and check it for yourself. And one of the most extreme cases I've had in my career was a fake genocide. An ethnic group had come in contact with us in Paris, a spokesperson, to tell us that, well, they were being wiped out by neighboring groups who were attacking them, and that this needed to come out because it was happening without the world knowing about it. So with my colleague, we decided to go there. And it was in Africa, a very remote place, 12 hours by 4x4 to get there. And then, well, the people there barred us from accessing the actual fighting place. They kept us about 5 kilometers outside and basically fed us a stream of so-called witnesses who were telling us some very dubious stories, including one young girl I remember who looked perfectly normal and basically told us her whole family had been wiped out, but was very unclear about the circumstances before she did selfies with us, telling us that she was so pleased to be on television. Basically, after a week of this treatment, we realized that no, this was not a genocide, that indeed there was violence in this city we were talking about, but it was all about controlling a migrant route in the middle of the desert. So, no genocide, but we did do one of the very first reports with one of these informal camps in the middle of the desert where they were keeping people.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
This city is widely considered as the centre of European art and architecture. But after 6 months of COVID that included 3 months of lockdown that crushed the tourism industry, how has the city of Venice changed? Join us to find out.
Encore on France 24 and France24.com.